Your suffering is your own activity. This little booklet was written by a lady called Kanya Suprithi, and she is a devotee of Adidar Samraj. And she explains in this little booklet that all human beings are suffering from one's own activity, represented by the clenched fist. And she says, we don't need to do that activity. So, this is what she says. People suffer pains and difficulties in life. There can be no doubt about this. Whether we are afflicted by illness, separation from our loved ones, or other forms of misfortune to one degree or another, all living beings suffer. But in addition to all the various misfortunes that we may experience, there is also a fundamental, a more basic form of suffering in our lives, one that is hardly ever considered or inspected, even though it affects us profoundly. This fundamental suffering is a deep, chronic mood of unhappiness, and one we carry with us all our lives. We feel the indications or signs of this more fundamental suffering in our anger, sorrow, and fear, and we display it as lovelessness, loneliness, antagonism, competition, dullness, doubt of love, feelings of inadequacy, boredom, and alienation. If you but scratch the surface of our daily lives, all human beings are characterized by this fundamental suffering. And if circumstances in life become increasingly difficult, this deep-seated mood magnifies and causes more troubles, more problems, more unhappy situations. We may feel irrational and overwhelmed, even in the most extreme cases, to the point where we feel we will go insane. Or we may just feel quietly desperate and complacent with our treadmill lives. Is this the way it has to be? Is there real help anywhere? Is there something or someone to aid us when our need is so great? On a national and worldwide scale, this uninspected suffering causes political unrest and war. Presently, the world at large is full of unpredictability, chaos, conflict, and problems which seem insurmountable. Looking at the state of our world, what confidence can we really have in the common solutions offered to mankind by politicians and social reformers? Can we really convince ourselves that we don't need a different kind of help? Clearly, the signs of the times shows us that we need a greater principle and greater point of view. The symptoms of our fundamental suffering and of all our methods of unhappiness are too painfully obvious for any of us to ignore any longer. If we have ever needed greater guidance, clearly it is now. Fortunately, the source to greater wisdom is available. We can truly come to a greater understanding of ourselves, our relationships, and the world we live in. We can change the course of our destiny. We can do something to change even the negative motion of the world at present. There is a perfect and true opportunity, a divine opportunity, available to us now. She considers two principles, and this is the first principle. This is what we must consider, each one of us, each and every one of us. Our fundamental suffering is self-imposed. Even though we may feel that other people or events have caused and justified our suffering, this fundamental unhappiness is an original and self-created reaction to life, even to birth itself. And we tend to animate and reinforce this reaction throughout our lives, isolating ourselves from fullness and love and constantly searching for union, pleasure, and self-satisfaction. Here, in a statement wherein he recounts the process of wisdom in his own early life, Adidar Samraj describes his observation of the course of our suffering, represented by this activity of the clenched fist. He says, "My own consideration was this: God, truth, or happiness, whatever that is altogether, happiness with a capital H, must necessarily be that which is always already the case. Therefore, I observed that the felt dilemma and the urge to seek are simply the absurd confession that God, truth, or happiness is absent now. And I observed further that the signs of dilemma and seeking are not a program for the actual future realization of God, truth, or happiness, but they are merely a means for preventing present realization of God, truth, or happiness. The feeling of dilemma and the urge to seek are actually the evidence of a disease, which is the conditional or psychophysical self in its chronic contraction upon itself and in its symptomatic non-realization of God, truth, or happiness. Indeed, it became clear to me that the ego, or the conventional I, is not an entity or an independent and static thing of being, but the ego, or the conventional I, is the chronic and total psychophysical activity of self-contraction, always associated with concrete results in the psyche, mind, emotion, body, and their relations. And the self-contraction can always be located in any moment in feeling as fear, anxiety, stress, and all other kinds of reactive emotions and blocks in the flow of natural bodily energy. So he's saying that our natural state is already one of happiness, and happiness is truth, and it also is reality with a capital R, and what we commonly call God, represented by the open hand disposition. So he is saying that we're seeking for happiness in all that we're doing from a chronic state of this self-contraction, which is unhappiness and which is the motivating force to seek happiness amongst the conditions of life and within our own circle of friends, etc. We're looking for others and things to make us happy rather than simply being happy. And to be happy is the most responsible and courageous thing that any human being can take on board, because it changes one's whole destiny. Instead of looking and seeking for happiness, we are simply being happy no matter what, because that's our inherent and natural state of being. So Kanya Supriti continues to say, Adidar's wisdom tells us that this reaction or contraction is unnecessary. If we will observe and understand this activity, we will no longer need to add this suffering to life. And in a talk Adidar gave years ago, at the very beginning of his work, he describes how liberating this process of observation and understanding is. He says, the usual man lives in what I have called vital shock. This shock ultimately includes more than the vital. It operates even on a very subtle level, but its most obvious and motivating form is the sense of shock in the vital being. Ordinarily, the vital, at its chief centre in the midst of the body, is contracted, and a man continually feels it, even physically. He may feel a kind of cramp, this tension in the midst of the body, and every man tries to relieve it continually through various experiences and pleasures. This vital centre is like the shutter in a camera. Like the shutter in a camera, it curls in on itself in order to close, or else unfurls in order to open. It is like your hand. If you clench your fist and hold it together as tightly as you can, it begins to become painful. Just so, this vital centre is alive, sentient, and when it contracts, like your hand, it creates a sensation. Not only does it create a physical sensation, but also many other reflections in life and consciousness. Therefore, when this contraction occurs in the vital, we not only get a cramp in the stomach, we have a whole life of suffering. So we've been doing this all our life. We're still doing it now. You're doing it right now. And it's that activity that has brought you here. Every aspect of vital existence is controlled by this image, this state, this vital shock. The patterns to which men become addicted are simply extensions of this contraction. Everyone is addicted to something to hopefully make them happy. In fact, what people are suffering is not their peculiar life patterns or strategies in themselves, but this original shock in the form of primary reaction, this contraction of which I speak. Men seek through all kinds of means to become free of their various symptoms, their various strategies, including the cramped sensation in the midst of the body. But if a man understands this contraction itself, this activity, this drama at the present, he doesn't have to deal with all the endless extensions of it, because true spiritual life, radical life, or life founded in this root understanding, is to deal with this fundamental present activity, to deal with this contraction, not with the search that is an expression of it, because it never ever releases any experience. It can never release this activity which every individual is doing. It is not to deal with the symptoms, not to deal with the strategies that it manifests, but with this activity itself, presently. This primary activity, this contraction, is the root and the support and the form of all the ordinary manifestations of suffering, all of the patterns of life that men acknowledge to be their suffering, this contraction, this avoidance of relationship is fundamentally a man's continuous present activity. We're talking about the whole of the world population. We're talking about thousands of years of egoic activity. What Adidar is revealing to us right now in this present moment is that we do not need to do this activity. And there has never ever been another person on earth that has explained so strongly and so clearly the reason for why the human race is suffering and always at dilemma, always in competition, always at war, always wanting others and things to make them happy. So someone who, like myself, who has taken on this practice of realizing that the body-mind is already happy, has given me greater freedom, a great liberation, simply to live and to enjoy the conditions of life as they are, however they present themselves to me. And we're talking about happiness with a capital H, because it differentiates itself from the happiness with a small h that one is always seeking. And he goes on to say, when the contraction does not take place, when it is no longer a matter of concern, when there is simply this unobstructed path, there is no dilemma. Then there is no one superior to the other. And there's no problem, no jealousy, no distinction. There simply is only enjoyment. And where life is constant as this enjoyment, unmade, unconditional enjoyment, there is the infinity of liberation, the cosmic consciousness of truth, the siddhi, which is power, of the real. It is simply the force of the heart, the real, which is unobstructed, unqualified existence. This is our true state, our true self, our true disposition without this contraction, is our inherent natural state of being. Unconditional, unmade. And I love this phrase that Adidar uses. It was never born and it will never die. It lives us. When there is no resistance, no contraction, no separation, there is just this ease of pleasure. There is no problem. Give it the names if you like. It is simply our natural state. So Kanya Supriti continues and she says, since the beginning of recorded history, mankind has wedded itself to a life of uninspected suffering. Even in the midst of our great moments of accomplishment, we persist in this suffering blindly, like partners in a bad marriage. We seem to have accepted unhappiness as a permanent companion. And the methods we use to try and accommodate life's suffering are too numerous to mention. Everything we do, including the search for fulfilling relationships, the search for a meaningful career, the search for physical satisfactions, it is a method we use to appease the symptoms of suffering. But they are not the cure. These pleasures are not dependable or predictable. We are looking for happiness in the wrong place. We all live our lives this way to the very end, and we miss out on the fundamental reason and purpose of life. In other words, life ends up passing us by, all because we have made choices which only solidify our suffering, our emptiness, and our unhappiness. Even our search for religion is based on this fundamental suffering, as though God were the cure to our problem. This is how Adidar explains it. If you want to get religious in our time, you must first decide that you have the dreaded gombu. Then you go to a doctor pope, a doctor church, a doctor Jesus. You try it all out. A doctor Mahatma, a doctor Mahatma Bu, a doctor Gombu Ananda. These are his fictitious but humorous names. And then there's this Dr. Gomananda Buharaj. As soon as you get the feeling that you have the disease, you start looking for religious answers. We're talking about millions, billions of people. This is what they're doing. This is what you're doing. Everyone is looking somewhere. Thousands of years. This is the truth, never been explained in the history of mankind. In truth, the religious or spiritual process has nothing at all to do with this dreaded gombu. See, I'm pinching myself now. It's not necessary. Or its cure. It has nothing to do with the disease you want to make the premise of the spiritual process. The first thing you must do when you truly become involved in the process associated with truth, which is this disposition, is to understand and immediately, directly, presently, to transcend the disease that you seek otherwise to cure. The pursuit of the cure of the disease is the same activity as the one whereby you first acquired the disease. So the disease is propelling you, motivating you to seek a cure. It is a version of the disease, something you do because you are diseased. It is not another process than disease. At most, it involves a different relationship to the disease, whereas previously you unwittingly did everything that compounded the disease. Now you want to do everything to get rid of it. The search for the cure is still another way of being diseased. It is not the way of truth. It is not the way that I teach. It is not true religion or true spirituality. True religion, true spirituality is the process that takes place when you are already well, when you are in your native position, when you are established in truth, happiness, or reality, represented by the open hand. The spiritual process is to understand how you contracted this disease, understand the mechanics of your presuming it always in this present moment, so that in every present moment you will be established in the free position, the position of already happiness, truth, or the presumption of being. The spiritual process then becomes the magnification of non-disease, prior happiness, the prior presumption. So he's wanting us to feel that we are doing this activity, this cramping, this disease. And once you feel that you're doing it, there's a way out of it that changes your destiny, so your life is always pleasurable, always an enjoyment, free of all suffering. Because once you stop doing this activity, you have no need to seek for a cure. You have no need to become addicted to indulgences. And you automatically live a mature life, a life of personal responsibility. Free. And you're freeing up everybody else to do that as well. You're not emotionally blackmailing them to make you happy. Kanya Suprithi says, all men and women and young people and children deserve the right to explore their own inherent, natural, godly nature. But how many really have been given the chance? How many of us have had the real opportunity to feel what is there in their own being, naturally, before there is suffering? Obviously, we need to find out more about spiritual life and the wisdom that shows us how we can transcend our suffering and the patterns that we create to perpetuate our own unhappiness. Basically, what is the cure for this self-contraction? I'll tell you in the next video. So, just a little recap. We're doing this activity of unhappiness, which is always motivating us to seek happiness in the realms of conditional life. And it's not a very nice way to live, because we're always in competition. We're always displeased with the conditions of life. If we are happy with the conditions of life, that happiness doesn't last long. We feel dependent on others to make us happy. We're always looking for gold stars. We're always looking to be ticked. Yes, that's good, that's good, that's good. We're always looking for approval, etc., etc. But there is a different way to live where we can be already happy, enjoying the circumstances of life, enjoying one another without this emotional dependency of one another. So we need to stop doing this activity and simply be happy. So I'll do another little video for you to listen to, where it tells us how to get from here to here.